I think things have really started to heat up in the ad tech market in the last year or so because you've had some releasing of some of the steam of so many companies that have been privately owned by growth equity and private equity firms being released now into the public market. So a few years ago, we really had Google and Facebook and Criteo and a couple other companies, but not very much in the ad tech space. And in the last year or so, we've had about 10 to 15 companies meaningfully move into the public market. What that's doing is creating a bunch of liquidity, which is giving opportunities for those companies once they go public to think about where they may want to go further to continue to maintain their strength as a public company. And so that's fueling some acquisitions that are starting to happen. At the same time, you have the SPAC market, which has come into the fore, and that is presenting a number of other companies that might not feel they have all the juice to go public, a second option to get into the public market, and that is the SPAC process. What you have there is a number of companies who are, I'd say, SPAC aspirants. They like to SPAC, but they maybe lack some of the components that make the public market interested in them through the de-SPACing process. So they may have flattened out in terms of their growth. They may not have quite the story, the future story that the public market is looking for. And so you're starting to see some of those companies now poke around and look for add-on companies to merge with them to then bring to market a better story, whether that M&A happens before the de-SPAC or after is inconsequential in some ways because it's causing a lot of these companies to start looking around at each other, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of activity there with companies really looking for partners, who to partner up with, who's going to help me as a bigger company tell a better story for my future, who's going to help me in terms of having maybe a firmer financial profile to present to the market. And but I think most importantly is the growth story. I think that's what I think is holding some of the companies up from being able to go through the SPAC process. And I think some of the innovation that's occurring will get released into these bigger businesses.
Nick, so could you explain what the role of an advisory is in the SPAC business? Because it's different. It's new to a lot of people. What your role is, how companies find advisors who help them with SPACs, how SPACs, if they need the help, how they, as not as buyers, but as sort of acquiring. The nomenclature is different, but how does the process work, and how do the matches get made?
I think it's important to think of the SPAC as a path, not the path. And I think that's one of the misconceptions. A lot of companies come to us and say, we want to go and SPAC. And I think that's not necessarily the right way to go about it. I think the right way to think about it is we would like to have a transformative event in our capital structure. And that may be through selling the business to a strategic or to a financial investors. And I would say that the financial buyers are actually looking much more competitive than some of the larger strategics right now. Coming out of COVID, some of the large companies are still struggling with their own businesses and restarting their engines, whereas the private equity is poised and ready to jump in. So you've seen some of the larger deals that people thought were going to SPAC have now turned over into private equity. And I think of things like companies like Triple Lift or Simplify are two good examples of that. And so I think a lot of people think it's sort of like, gee, I'd love to have one of those SPACs one day, and careful what you wish for, because it's a complicated process. It is still a very regulated public market process. And I think at the end of the day, and you have to really think through a lot of different things in your business. Do you have the right management team? Are you reporting, and have you audited your financials sufficiently? And what are your uses of capital? What's your story going to be? Remember that the public market is really a futures market. So they're really focused on what your 22 and 23 numbers are going to be. And if, God forbid, like some of the early ad tech IPOs, you go public and then miss your numbers, you may never get out of that, out of that penalty box. So I think it's an appealing approach for people to take, but it comes with a lot of cost and a lot of peril. And so I think we at Progress Acquisition Corp have looked at a number of companies, I think over 100 companies, and I'm not part of the Progress Acquisition Corp, but I'm familiar with it, and I think they've looked at a number of companies, and I think a number of them just aren't quite ready yet, and they need to mature more, either through organic growth or inorganic growth. So I think that's fueled a whole new level of activity in the M&A market, and so our advice to companies is be prepared, be ready to get the call, and then certainly study what that SPACing entity or that company is trying to go through a SPAC. What's their preparedness look like, and what is the reception they're getting from the SPAC investors and SPAC buyers?
Now, you guys have closed a venture round. Let's talk venture capital for a minute and sort of where venture investing is and sort of how that fits in terms of innovation nowadays and what you guys are doing.
Sure. So Progress Ventures started up about 12 years ago, coming out of the banking side of the business. We were moving up market, and felt like we were leaving behind a lot of great friends and companies who are innovators. And so we started investing in companies like MediaMath and Integral Ad Science, Simplify, and a few others. Of course, it's a portfolio. Some don't go out as well, but what we did is we found that those companies really had a good handle on what was going to be happening next in the market. So it really complements our banking business quite well, giving our clients a lot of insight into where things will go next. And so in this last fund, we've raised $35 million for the fund, and we have also an additional opportunity fund, which gets us up closer to 50 million. And we brought in some strategic investors who really bolster the story and give us a lot more capital to work with. In the venture fund right now, areas that we're looking at are retail commerce, social commerce, voice tech, and certainly data and identity. We've had some great success in the data market with the sale of TrueOptic to TransUnion last year. We're still in Iris TV. We're still in Pixability. So there's a number of good companies still in our portfolio, but we've made 3 voice tech investments. One is called Instrumatic, another called Blue Tag, and a third called Disruptel. And then we've made 2 data investments, ID5 out of Paris, France, and Narrative out of New York, narrative.io. So we like to invest thematically. So we invest typically in 2 or 3 companies in the same general area. It helps us and helps those companies as they get to know each other and actually collaborate nicely, which is healthy. So these are areas that we are hearing from the larger strategics or the larger companies in the sector where they'd like to go next. And so it seems a logical place for us to be making these investments.